Hello, and my name is Pete Rushmer, and I'm your host today of A Half Dozen Things podcast. A Half Dozen Things is a podcast for business owners just like you. Whether you're an underdog hungry for success, or you're already smashing it but want to continue to level up, we are here each week for you to get insight and learning from the very best in the business. No fluff, no BS, and no self-proclaimed gurus talking about how easy business or life is. We're recording. The red light's rolling. Hello and welcome to A Half Dozen Things podcast. It's wonderful to have you join us and listening in. So I really do hope you enjoy this one. I'm really excited to speak to Darren today about carbon literacy and what that means for fleet operators. I did actually have a re-listen, Darren, to our original podcast. So Darren and I recorded a podcast a little while ago, and I was in the gym this morning and I had a listen to it to make sure that, one, I don't repeat all the things I asked previously, and that we've got some fresh content. But at the same time, that's a shout out. If you enjoy this podcast, do search Darren Newman on the back catalogue. And if you haven't listened to it, go back and listen to it. Darren is an expert in all things low carbon and carbon literacy as well. So it's absolutely fantastic to have you on, mate. Just for the purpose of the listeners, are you able to just give a bit of an introduction if people haven't listened to the previous podcast and they're new to listening to Darren?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Peter. I think most people prefer Eye of the Tiger or something when they're in the gym, but each to their own. It must have been two years ago now, I guess we did that almost, wasn't it?
It's got to be getting on for 2 years ago, mate. It's got to be getting on for 2 year.
Time flies. Yeah, Darren Newman, obviously, low carbon truck consultancy is my sort of small business. I work on my own. I work essentially in the area of decarbonising transport. I've worked in transport all my life. And more recently, I sold gas vehicles for Volvo. That was my last sort of employed job, but I've worked in sales, in marketing, product development for Mercedes, for Renault, for Volvo. Met thousands of both fleet and retail customers over my time, looking at, understanding what they do, trying to take money from them in exchange for some nice shiny new trucks. But the last couple of years, I've been looking at how this sector copes with the sort of net zero and decarbonisation. So looking at all the legislation, all the technology, all the guidelines, all the actions and pledges that we need to take. And working with customers, large and small, really, to get them on that journey, to get them to understand what their impact is on climate, what their emissions are from different activities and operations and different vehicles, how they can impact those emissions, how they can plan their future towards, moving their business towards net zero. I've been doing a little bit of writing as well for Freight Carbon Zero magazine, so getting a few articles published in there now, getting quite popular on LinkedIn, where I tend to act as LinkedIn police for everyone who makes spurious claims about what is and what isn't possible on both sides of the argument as well. So I try to
You're the moderator. You're the moderator
for LinkedIn and all things decarbonisation, and that sometimes gets me into some interesting conversations.
That's fascinating. That's really cool. That's really cool, mate.
There's a lot of there's a lot of incentives for people to hold a certain view, and obviously you can understand if they work for an organisation. Certainly, we've seen the oil and the gas and the energy industries making certain claims and trying to push policy in certain directions. People who are, owners of large and extremely expensive assets don't want those things to become redundant. So there are a lot of people pushing for a lot of things which aren't necessarily in the best interest of either the planet or the climate or the transport industry itself. And I think there's, claims on both sides of the argument. You've got the fanatics who will tell you that an EV will do everything that an ICE vehicle will do. And you've got, the outright deniers on the other side. And it can be very difficult to understand what's correct and what's not. It's difficult to understand if someone's speaking from a place of honesty or from a place of a vested interest. And, everybody has an obligation to look after the company they work for. Everyone has an obligation to not do anything or say anything that's going to affect the profitability of their company, even if that company is making something which, is questionable or maybe outlined in the future. So it's really difficult to look beyond the headlines to see what the real message is and to see who's really saying it. And I think that takes a little bit of skill, a bit of diligence, a bit of understanding, and a bit of thought as to why people make some of the claims that they do. We're going down this path. We have to go down this path. There's lots of legislation around what we can and can't do. We've got phase outs for internal combustion engines. But we've also got different technologies in the space. We've got alternative fuels. We've got alternative drivelines. We've got zero tailpipe vehicles. We've got low carbon fuels. So there's a lot of different avenues to take. There's a lot of different things to look at, and a lot of different people selling a slightly different message. So, my kind of raison d'etre is to try and make some of that stuff clear for people that are busy running their transport operations and to try and keep their business profitable. So and really, we're here today to talk about something else which is going to help operators along that road, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it sounds like you're being very pragmatic about it, Darren, and so I'm not going to start calling you Darren Thunberg anytime soon.
As I say, I try to steer a neutral path.
I've got a bit of an apology to make actually after the last session. So I got an ouch from one of our previous work colleagues because during the last podcast, and I'd forgotten about it until I listened back, and I remember the comment I got. But Rich Morse, one of our old colleagues, commented on the previous podcast that we did. I made a bit of an offhand comment, and it wasn't at all aimed at anyone, but it was aimed at salespeople in general. Essentially, like you were saying, peddling their own sort of agenda, and that essentially people could get caught out by buying into it and it not being the right solution. I think I was maybe a little bit harsher than that in the way I said it, and I got an ouch from him. So apologies, Rich. I never meant to. I never meant to insult you at all. I'm sure. I'm sure that salespeople, and in particular, let's say our former colleagues at Volvo, I'm sure they are absolutely down the line with honesty around and integrity, because it's certainly one of the core values of that business, mate. So I'm
not suggesting that people lack integrity. I think you have to realise that people have a duty to look after the interest of the business that they work for.
That's true.
And in some ways, you have to believe in the product that you're selling. So there's no harm in being passionate about your product, but obviously you have to take a step back and say, is this best for me?
That's absolutely right. Absolutely right.
He won't lie, but he can be economical with the truth in certain circumstances. He's certainly not going to highlight your competitors or his competitors' best features unless he's got a good argument to overcome it. But
absolutely. So carbon literacy then. So the sort of backdrop for this for listeners is that Darren and I have been speaking for a little while. Darren has been the go-to expert that I go and speak to around low carbon and reducing carbon, and around carbon literacy as well. And Darren, you've been working on essentially a training course, haven't you, that we're going to be calling essentially carbon literacy for fleet operators, which is the name of the podcast here. And it's going to be like a new offering from us that we're going to offer in partnership to the Flagship Partners customer base. So I'm interested to just hear a bit more about the journey you've been on with that, because there's been quite a bit of additional training involved, and it seems like there's an awarding organisation who provide a certificate off the back of it. So are you able to just sort of give us a bit more of an explanation around sort of the background that sort of come into being able to offer this?
Yes, well, my own arrival at this place really was I was aware that there's an awful lot of information out there. There's an awful lot of change going on in this industry. There's an awful lot of outsiders saying, oh my God, look at trucks, they're so dirty, we have to clean them up. And there's an awful lot in the press, and we all know what's going on and some of the messages. So obviously I work with customers directly on their net zero plans and helping them navigate the world of alternative technologies. But I think there's a wider piece to be done, and I think there's a lack of understanding about carbon, about emissions, about pollution, about air quality. Are they the same thing? Are they different? So what I set out to do was put a course together, which kind of laid out all of this stuff. What's the legislation? What's the pathway? What are the manufacturers doing? What are the potential solutions? And just give people a better understanding of the whole language and terminology of the world, so that when they speak into people, they can navigate it a bit better. So, and carbon literacy was the name I was going to give the course. And sort of partway through putting that together, I come across an organisation called the Carbon Literacy Project. They're a UK-based organisation. They're a registered charity, and they provide training. Generally, they provide training for individuals and how they can impact their own carbon emissions and carbon footprint. So I approached those guys because they're looking to branch out into different industry sectors. So they're working with different trade partners to try and promote what they're doing within different business sectors. So I contacted them and said, look, I'm working on a course for the transport sector, heavy trucks specifically. Is this something you're interested in working with me on? And they said, yeah, absolutely. We've got, they've got a big partner, Auto Trader, in the car sector. So Auto Trader has donated a big chunk of money to the Carbon Literacy Project. As I said, they are a charity. And they're literally training, thousands of people on what they can do in their personal lives to reduce their carbon impact. So I said, saw that there was some synergy between those two things. So I've been on that carbon literacy training. I've got my own certificate now. Part of that training, you have to make some personal pledges as to how you're going to reduce your personal impact. So I went through that course, and I've included some of the things that those guys had within some of the things that I wanted to say about the transport market specifically. And now I'm going through the process of getting the course that I've developed certified by the Carbon Literacy Project. So in place of personal actions, we put business actions and what you can do in a transport fleet or a transport operation to reduce and affect your emissions. So once we get that course certified by the Carbon Literacy Project, we'll be able to roll that out, as you've said. It's a minimum of 8 hours. That's part of their requirements. And as I said before, there's certain pledges and commitments that you have to take. They're entirely open as to what you do, but you have to pledge some action which involves other people. And I think that's the real key to the Carbon Literacy Project and what they're trying to do, because it's very difficult to do some of this stuff on their own. Okay, we all could think, we can do this, we can do that, but what tiny little difference does what I do as an individual make? So it's all about opening up and discussing with other people what they're doing, and so that's part of the sort of qualification period. So essentially, we'll have a course which will focus on climate science, what the impact of emissions and climate change actually is. What are the causes of climate change? Then we go through what is the legislation and policy framework around these things, how we're addressing it as a world by different sector. Then the carbon literacy course goes into personal carbon footprint, but we won't be doing that. We'll be going into a business carbon footprint. And as I said before, there's some actions, pledges, and a certification at the end of it. So in addition to that, what I've added is discussion about alternative fuels, about drop-in fuels like HVO and FAME, alternative fuels like CNG, LNG, and biomethane, We talk about hydrogen and we talk about electric and all the pros and cons of those different solutions, what the impact of the technology is, what the impact on your emissions are. We don't go too detailed into the sort of return on investment and costs, so we can cover that at a fairly high level. But some of those calculations obviously are quite complicated, and at the moment more so because energy prices are really spiking up and down. So we say we look at what is the impact of transport on emissions. What can we do to reduce emissions and make our transport more effective and efficient? What is the legislation specifically around transport? What are the timelines where different legislation kicks in? What is the long-term goal? I think everyone's heard of net zero 2050, but what a lot of times there's intermediate steps along the way as well that affect transport and affect truck manufacturers and all those things. We go into terminology. What is a carbon offset? What is a carbon footprint? And to try and talk about some of the terms which are used in this world and this industry. Then we look at how to calculate emissions from transport. We look at what's involved in carbon reporting, who is affected by carbon reporting. That's a legislative piece there, which in theory only affects the very big businesses, listed companies and large companies. But what we're finding is that because those large companies also interact, they have subcontractors and they work with suppliers, those suppliers form part of the big companies' carbon footprint or carbon emissions. So many of the big companies now are going to the smaller companies and saying, right, you're part of my, what we call scope 3 emissions. Can you tell me what your emissions are and what your plan is and how you intend to reduce them? And a lot of customers and operators are getting caught short by that question. A lot of operators are now seeing sustainability sections on tenders that they apply for. Anyone that's applying for government or council business is seeing these options to tick and to fill in and to detail. So yeah, we go into carbon reporting, where to get the numbers from, and how to make a net zero plan for your business, really. And I think some of the big businesses have whole departments and they have whole teams looking at efficiency, looking at sustainability. And there's a lot of things they need to do from a legal perspective. But some of the smaller companies, they don't have that legal framework. They don't have that necessity. So sometimes they think, oh, well, I'm off the hook here, or I don't have to do anything until 2035 or 2040, whenever combustion engines are banned. And then the next week, their main customer knocks on their door and said, right, we need you to reduce your emissions by X. What are you doing about it? And if you haven't looked into it, you stood there with a blank face, and all of a sudden your contract is suddenly at risk that you've been doing for the last 5 or 10 years. So it's having a big impact on smaller businesses. And the idea of the course is to make sure people are prepared, they understand what the language and the landscape is, what they can do, and they're not on the back foot really when customers approach them saying, what are you doing in terms of sustainability?
I see this regularly with our customers, particularly with bigger businesses. We're asking them what they're doing, and it also down to, so one of the key applications I see for this is we've got several customers who have ISO 14001. Which is around, so that they team that with their quality standard and their health and safety standard. Then they've got environmental 14001. And this is a fantastic project to actually meet the criteria for 14001 as a business activity to do, and making a pledge around their carbon reduction, making sure that they train people, because I've seen some weird and wonderful aims and objectives for people with 14001, and actually this is this would certainly help meet those objectives for 14001.
Yeah, and I think the other place which comes into as well, Peter, is FORS, and part of FORS Gold, I think there is a requirement to do some investigation into carbon reduction and more sustainable technologies, and I could be wrong, and you may have more experience of this than I do, but I think in the main, FORS are relatively happy with, I'm not going to say a low effort in that area, but I think they've been happy with a cursory, we've looked at it, we've done that. But I think
Are you saying they're happy with a bit of lip service, Darren?
Possibly. I don't know if you have any experience there.
Well, yeah, I couldn't have an opinion on it at all, really. But it's I think in reality, in fairness, I'm going to give Force a break, because I know that this year they're doing a lot of work on the integrity of the standards, and that they're not able to be lip service. So they are. I know they are trying to change it. As far as I know. So I think they are doing some work on it. But certainly, I think they are. I think the earned recognition scheme from DVSA has kind of like pushed it. They've pushed the Force standard to really have to up their game. Hi, it's Pete from Flagship Partners. We're proud to sponsor a Half Dozen Things podcast. Flagship Partners help their clients become safer, greener, and greater through a range of consultancy and training services. We offer audits through to risk assessments, contracts through to support with managing your culture, all the way from mandatory training through to management training as well. So if you need any support, please do get in touch with Flagship Partners today.
Yeah, I don't even mean to them, and I think they're doing great work, and it's a noble objective. But I just think
it is absolutely.
In the past, that's been in there maybe as an afterthought, but there were less options on the table, and it was a less high-profile topic when Force first come out. But I think as time goes on, that will become a bigger part of the Ford standard as well. And I think, everybody operating in this industry really needs to understand what's coming down the road, because I think, things slowly change at first, and they can really pick up pace and accelerate. And if you're not ready, we have this sort of technology S-curve where things start very slowly and they end very slowly, but in the middle, there's a massive acceleration and adoption. And at some point, I think the scales will tip between low carbon transport and high carbon transport. And I think at one point, high carbon transport, for want of a better expression, is the most common form of transport at the moment, because some of the technology is very new. But there will be a point within the next decade where that flips over. And if you're running diesel trucks, you could be in the minority, and you could be struggling to get work. So, it's forearmed, it is forewarned, I guess, is the phrase there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key is certainly I spend my time a lot of time reading up, researching, trying to understand what's going on in the world of transport. And one of the things that I always do struggle with is, like you say, that I really get to grips with understanding what the landscape's going to look like over the next 10 years. And I think a lot of people in the industry are a bit concerned. We have a history or a tendency in the sector to often leave things until they become a pressing problem. And just so I can back that up before people start screaming at me, DVS is a really good example. The direct vision standard, everyone left that until the last minute, and it had to be delayed, and people left it. And I see the same thing week in, week out with driver CPC as well. We've had several cycles of driver CPC, and people have just left it, continue to leave it till the last minute. And I'm conscious that this is going to become, like you say, if we end up with the situation where we have high carbon transport and low carbon transport, and we have operators of each, they're going to potentially be at a competitive disadvantage longer term, as they start to lose business and aren't in a position to invest. Now's the time to think about essentially that it's almost like the old adage. I know this sounds really corny, but the old adage of when's the best time to plant a tree? Well, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today, isn't it? And this is very much that, isn't it? Because people can go equipped into what they know.
They have a habit of creeping up on you. You're absolutely right. We've seen it with many different things. We've seen it with just about every Euro level since 1990 that's been introduced. People either pre-buying the old spec, or we've seen it with EGR versus SCR. We've seen it with digital tachographs. These, and those aren't even big changes really, but these kind of step changes in legislation or technology tend to have a disruptive effect, and no one in transport likes disruption. It's the enemy of what everyone in logistics and transport does. So if what we don't want is a two-tier transport system where you've got those that do and those that don't. So we need to have an integrated transport system, and that means everyone working at their own pace, at their own investment level and things like that. And I think it's not all about spending money in investment. It's just about understanding what's possible. And there's many unanswered questions. There is no battery electric 6x2, for example. There is no hydrogen products to speak of on the market. So there's a lot of could be, would be, should be in the future, but a lot of these things aren't here today. So it's not really about how much money do I need to spend, and how much is this going to cost me, but it's just about understanding what direction the technology may go in, what things do you need to think about, what do you need to plan for, because EVs are seen as sort of the big savior by some people in some sectors, but the vehicle is very much a small part of the EV journey, and infrastructure and charging and supply to your depot and upgrading of your supply through your district network operator and all those things, they take a lot of time and they take a lot of planning. I don't know if you saw this week, but there was a council, and I'm not going to name them because I can't quite remember, but somewhere in the sort of East Midlands, I think there was a council that just parked up a load of EVs because they hadn't got the charging sorted, they hadn't got the supply to their site sorted, and there's a multi-million-pound investment sat in a field, which is horrible to see. No doubt someone's going to get their knuckles wrapped for that. But it's not in anyone's interest, is it, to put the cart before the horse, to order trucks before you know where they're going, and that you can operate them and charge them.
And so I'm sort of listening and sort of working through sort of the agenda and the thought process I had with the podcast. I just wanted to clarify for people listening, who would you suggest is like the ideal target market for this type of learning with the carbon literacy work that we're doing? Because in my head, I'm seeing the bigger, more corporate fleet operators. Chances are we'll have sustainability managers who are sort of becoming and learning to become experts in this area. We're sort of targeting this more independent operators, aren't we? And potentially the senior leadership within those sort of medium size, potentially large size as well, because you need to be some size operation to be able to justify a full-time sustainability person. But essentially this is for strategic level, senior managers, directors, that kind of thing, owners of small, medium and large size operators. Is that sort of where your headspace is at with it, Darren, from a learning point of view?
There's two pieces of legislation around this which will affect certain companies. There's SECR. This is streamlined energy and carbon reporting. It's mandatory for any listed company, so if you're on the stock exchange, any large company as defined by the Companies Act 1988, whenever it was. And the criteria, I think, is you have to have 250 employees. I think you have to have a £35 million turnover and an £18 million balance sheet. If you're there or above, you have to do SECR reporting, which is, as I say, streamlined energy and carbon reporting. So that is reporting up the chain, just like you do with your annual accounts, all of your emissions from vehicle use, from fuel use, from gas use, electric use, any industrial processes, all of that stuff has to be reported. And within that, there are three categories of emissions. We have Scope 1 emissions, and they are all direct emissions from that business. So anything that is emitted on site or through the vehicle, or through the company's assets. So that's all your diesel for your trucks. That's all of your fuel for your forklifts. That's any energy that you get delivered to your site, that you burn on site, that you use on site. So that's your Scope 1 emissions. They're emitted by the assets owned by the business. Then we have Scope 2 emissions, and they are any emissions which are emitted elsewhere from energy that you import. So that's really the emissions from the electric power station on the electricity that you buy and run your business, whether it's for lights, whether it's from computers, or whether it's for commercial vehicles. And then we have this big scope 3, and scope 3 is all emissions which aren't part of your company's assets, but are emitted by other people because of what your company does. So that's all of your materials inbound supply. If anyone does anything because you've given them an order number to do it, that's your scope 3 emissions. So if you're getting suppliers to bring stuff into your RDC and you're taking it out, well, those suppliers' emissions are your scope 3 emissions. So the supermarkets, for example, if you're delivering into an RDC for a supermarket, let's say you run a small farm and you're delivering eggs or something like this, you're that supermarket's scope 3 emissions, and you could be several supermarkets' scope 3 emissions. Now, scope 3 up until now has been voluntary. So companies have to report their scope 1, they have to report their scope 2, but their scope 3 has been voluntary or optional. Now, you might think that means nobody does it. That's not true at all, because the organizations that are on this journey want to be seen to be doing the right thing, and everyone has an obligation to do the right thing. And I'll go back to that in a moment. But so scope 3 is becoming more and more prevalent. It will at some point become part of the legislation. So at that point, all of the big companies that use subcontractors, they use suppliers, and even if you just supply, office equipment into a big organization, if they're in that category for reporting, they're going to be knocking on your door one day saying, what are your carbon emissions? Have you got a plan to reduce them? Can you share that with me? And at that point in time, that's when the customer's on the back foot. So it's the people that are going to be approached by those big businesses to say, you're part of my scope 3. That's who this is really aimed at, so that they can have a sensible, informed, knowledgeable conversation about what they are doing, what they can do, what support they would need to do that. Because many big organizations will pay more for sustainable transport if they're trying to reduce their own emissions, and they've got a choice of 2 suppliers, one running, let's say, electric vans and one running diesel vans. There's a good chance, even if they have to pay a little bit more, they're going to go with the guy running EVs because it impacts their carbon footprint, which is on their annual reporting to their customers. So that's SECR. So that is driving a lot of this change. There's another piece of legislation which is called ESOT, which is the Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme, and there's quite a bit of overlap. Again, it's big companies that are affected in general, and this is about energy efficiency, but it's really to the same end, to reduce carbon emissions. So any big companies that fall into that will have staff. They'll have sustainability staff, departments, and they'll have a view on it. They'll have energy management systems and all of this. So those guys don't really need a great deal of help. Sometimes they do, don't get me wrong, because often the sustainability people aren't really transport people. And I think this is what the area that I'm trying to fill is that interface between transport people, because that's what I am essentially, and sustainability. A lot of sustainability have studied sustainability and come through industry that way, and they know about cars because most people know about cars. They know a little bit about vans because people see quite a few vans, but when it comes to trucks and heavy trucks and transport and logistics, they really don't know. So no. I do work with some of those people, but in the main, it's the smaller people that haven't got sustainability staff. They're focused on running their business. They want to do the right thing. They want to be prepared when the question comes, and they want to have a plan. So yeah, that's really where it's
fantastic, man. Do you know what? I've just learned so much because I had no idea about either of those pieces of legislation. So I don't know whether that makes me massively ignorant, but I had no idea at all about them. So
if they don't affect you, they don't affect you. But one day, if you work for a big organisation, now imagine your footprint relatively small, but I don't know if anyone's ever knocked on your door and asked you what you're doing. Have you got a net zero plan?
No one has. We've just not got that far ahead yet. But it is something. So I've got I'm consciously aware that our customers are going to be in that position. So I certainly want to be the reason for wanting to discuss this is that we want to be there to be able to support them as and when this becomes part of the agenda. So to that end, essentially, if people are interested in the carbon literacy training that we're going to be offering, there is going to be options to be able to do it. Put like specific in-house courses. Some people might want you, Darren, to come and train within their business to potentially their directors, and that can be run, like Darren said, it needs to be 8 hours. So that could either be a really exhaustive day or potentially 2 shorter days. Or we are going to be looking around Q2 to be offering essentially open courses that companies can put maybe 1 or 2 people on. At Flagship Partners in Peterborough, about Q2 time, an expected cost to give people an idea of that. We're thinking around the £300 a person mark. So this isn't going to be a driver CPC course. It's a completely different kettle of fish, as you've heard from Darren just now. We talk about climate science, change, causes, policy. We're going to be really actually addressing specifically, your business, and also making pledges as well. So that the value is going to be absolutely huge for your business, particularly if you're looking at FORS, if you're looking at ISO standards, if you're looking at earned recognition, or if you're starting to operate with these larger businesses and fall under that legislation, you're going to be well equipped to be able to help support them and be sort of in a really good position. So I'd suggest that at the moment, Sorry, Dan.
Can I just insert that? Or if you just want to do the right thing, you may be under no commercial or legal.
Absolutely,
product, You may have a view of the future of this world, and you may want to do something for the right reasons without any impetus from legislation or commercial means.
Absolutely, I think, and ultimately, it is going to be doing the right thing. So you've got the moral issue, you've kind of got the financial issue, but then you're also going to be strategically that you're going to be doing the right thing, but also getting yourself, getting your business prepared ahead of time, and give yourself the knowledge that you need to be able to cope with that. So have I missed anything, Darren? What have I sort of missed out of our discussion and summary so far? Is there anything that I've not asked that I should have asked?
Well, no, but I think what I'd like to say, the intention of the course that we're going to put on together, it's going to be face-to-face. And the idea there is, there's a lot of information, which I think I went through a lot of the different topics earlier. But really, I think the benefit of a face-to-face course is we can all ask the dumb questions. We can all ask, how does this affect me? This is my fleet. This is what I do. How can I do something? What can we be done here? So I think for me, the idea of having a relatively small group of people, we can really get into the detail. And the idea is you can come away from that course with a good ability to write your own net zero plan and to put your own emissions on a piece of paper and to think about what they are and be prepared with that information for when someone knocks on your door, or they don't. But as I said before, there's a bunch of legislation, there's a bunch of targets, there's a bunch of incentives to get us from where we are today to net zero at 2050. And if you add all of those legislation together, if you add all the targets and all the guidelines, it's still massively short of the carbon reduction we need to do. And that needs to come from changes of the way we live, the way we work. It needs to come from voluntary action of individuals. It needs to come from voluntary action of businesses to be doing the right thing. And legislation can only take us so far. There has to be a willingness to actually do the right thing here. And I think that's, many people think, the government will just legislate and, the truck manufacturers will just provide us with clean products and we just buy them when the time's right and, everything's fine. It's not the situation. The situation we're in and there's every opinion out there in the world about what's happening with the climate, but the overwhelming evidence is it's getting worse and worse. And some of these things, we just don't know what the runaway effect is going to be and who's going to be impacted. So there is a real moral dimension to this of what, that we should be doing the right thing. And as I said before, I'm not here to preach. I'm just here to navigate people through it, and people that want to do things, I'm going to help them do what they can. And there's lots of things you can do which don't involve investing money, changing your business model, buying new technology. There's lots of sensible things that you can do around being a little bit more efficient. And that's, to me, that's always the important first step, is make sure you're doing the best you can today with what you've got today. Make sure you're measuring your efficiency, make sure you know where your emissions are coming from. It's very often you can easily buy a product which is better than another product that doesn't cost anything more. So there are lots of things you can do in terms of improving your fuel consumption through driver training, through reduced idling, through aerodynamics. There's lots of ways you can start small and grow as you learn. So there's lots of things you can do, but the important thing is, there is a gap between legislation and where we need to get to, which has to be filled with voluntary commitments and actions.
Fantastic. And it leads me really well, Darren, actually, onto my next podcast. I'm interviewing shortly a good friend of mine, a guy called Mark Shortland, who works in a completely different industry for Shop. His company's called Shoplight, and they recently became a B Corp. Have you heard of B Corp before?
I have, yeah. It's an interesting concept, I think.
And actually, they're essentially B Corp is around people, planet, profit. So it's around essentially doing the right thing for people and having this accountability around people and how they look after the people within their business, and also the people affected by their business, as well as their planet, their carbon, the things they do, those kinds of things. And it's going to be really interesting to hear from him. He's in a completely different industry, but he's had to do a lot of work around the impact they have in the work they do, and the lighting that they buy, and how the lighting comes in, and how it's manufactured, and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's important that, and the reason I raise that, and actually Mark's going to be an interesting guest, is that he's out of a completely different industry, and a lot of our stuff, we talk about fleet and we often feel like, oh, it's all on our shoulders and it's only us, but actually there's companies all over from different industries. This is not just a transport problem. This is a global situation which is affecting every single business.
It is, and my brother works in the building sector. He's a surveyor, and more he's looking at building efficiency and insulation and energy retention and all of those things, and it is becoming higher up everyone's agenda. We've seen a few things happen last year. We've seen air quality on the first death certificate, quite a somber subject, but it's that's the first time that's happened, and some argue that's a political move, but these things are changing. The social contract is changing, and I think everyone's a part of that. And it's not just trucks, it's not just transport, it's everything. How we heat our homes, how we conserve energy, how we cook our food, the products that we buy, the companies that we interact with. All of these things have an influence about the shape of the world in the future. And I don't want to be a doomsday.
No, it's all good.
But it's there's some scary things going on, isn't there?
Absolutely. I look forward, Darren, to be inundated with people inquiring about the carbon literacy training that we're offering. So if people are interested and want to get in touch, use hello@flagshippartners.co.uk. Have a look at our website. We're going to be launching a page soon to detail more about the training. Get in touch with me direct, get in touch with Darren direct. It's Darren Newman on LinkedIn. Probably worth looking at him as the carbon moderator. I think that's your new name, LinkedIn carbon moderator. Thank you for listening. Quick shout out. I've been drinking out of Central Aggregates mug. I went to earned recognition audit for Central Aggregates. I don't know if you know them in Colville, Darren.
I don't know them personally, but I know them.
Yeah. So I've been at an earned recognition audit. They're keen podcast listeners. and they've asked me to give them a shout out. So big shout out to Central Aggregates. Thanks for the mug. The coffee was amazing. Thank you.
Aggregates.
Darren, it's been a pleasure having you on, and I'm sure we'll probably make it a third one as time gets closer and we're looking at Q2, and we're going to be looking at really sort of gearing up, launching the carbon literacy training. I think we'll probably have a little revisit, but hopefully the listeners got a lot of value out of it. And thanks for coming on, Darren. Really appreciate it, mate.
No problem. You're welcome. Yeah, and I think once we've got a few courses under our belt, then we can see what the feedback is and share that with some of your listeners as well. So
I think that'd be a fantastic opportunity. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much, Darren, and thank you for listening. See you later, everybody.
Cheers, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I really hope you loved today's episode, and if you did, please make sure you subscribe and listen out for future episodes too. Please do share it across your social media channels. We hope to reach more and help more people. If you want to find out more about me, my name's Pete Rushmer. You'll find me across any social media channel and my business, Flagship Partners, and we're your partners in success across your business. Thank you. See you again soon.